Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage our TED Talk, Spotting the Fakers, a smarter way to clean up survey data.
Okay, good morning, everyone. So this morning, myself, Jay Myers, and Sebastian Sciarra, we're going to share some primary research that we've been doing at JD Power around spotting dubious survey takers. So it's an age-old problem. You design your survey, host it online, go source some supply from panel companies. And at JD Power, we find that methodology is very efficient, very effective. We have high-quality benchmarks. Vast majority of the sample we get from panel companies is genuine respondents. But there are dubious respondents that we have to detect through various measures to try and remove from our data so that our results are not biased. So examples of those include people that are on multiple panels that might be trying to take the same survey through different panels, individuals that are not really engaged with the survey and not really giving thoughtful answers, and then of course people that are just trying to generate as much incentive as they can. So what we found over the years, these problems are not new, and we've been using what are called legacy checks. Examples of those types of checks are speeders or slowpokes, so people are going too fast or too slow, trap or red herring questions, duplicate response rules. So we do use digital fingerprinting, which captures a lot of the duplicate respondents and the outright ingenuine dubious respondents. But we also use other survey-based duplication rules. And then we have what we call invalid response rules, which are essentially response patterns that just don't make sense within the survey. So these legacy checks have been used for years, and they're built on kind of a legacy survey model. And at JD Power, over the last 5 years, we've been transforming our survey methodology to move to shorter surveys, which we call modular surveys, but also using our own private router to manage the sample across our studies. So in this new methodology, we needed some new approaches to identify dubious respondents in our surveys. So we've been looking for what are some new approaches that would work with a shorter survey, because our legacy approaches, they're designed for that 20 to 40 minute survey, and now we're moving to a survey that's well under 10 minutes as kind of the initial module, and we need to identify dubious respondents at that point. So what we've landed on are what we call retest type questions, and very simple concept. It's essentially asking the respondent very similar questions or even the same question at multiple points in the survey and seeing if they give a consistent answer. Obvious, one of the categories that we're using for that is a brand retest. So JD Power, we're benchmarking brands, pretty key measure in our survey, and so we're asking people within our private router, what products do you have, what brands do you use, and then when they get into the survey, at the end of the survey, we ask them, what brand did you use? We've also tested other categories, demographics, culture, psychographics, and then study-specific questions. Going to focus more on the brand retest here. So for this body of research that we did, one of the studies, we created an online retailer study. So we asked you, what's your most, tell us about a recent online purchase. Where did you purchase from? And we got some surprising answers that within a short survey session, people that said they purchased from Amazon, 13% of them couldn't identify Amazon as their recent retailer that they made a purchase from. So those numbers are a little bit higher compared to some of the other studies that we've tested, but that's the concept that we're going for. Are people giving us consistent answers? And if they're not, for whatever reason, we're identifying them as dubious respondents. So in this study, in this body of research, we tested two different types of studies. We had a high incidence study, which was e-commerce, and then a low incidence, which was solar panel usage, and we compared these retest checks with legacy checks. And we wanted to see which approach identified more dubious respondents and seemed to be more reliable. Sebastian's going to go through the results.
Okay, so Jay has set up that we have two forms of quality checks that we want to compare. And in order to do that, we need a common set of metrics. And so we landed on basically 3 categories of metrics that I'll go through in turn. And I show this table here because I'm going to be showing it quite a bit in the slides to come, so start getting used to them. If we go through the metrics, starting with the index metrics, we're JD Power. We run surveys on customer satisfaction, so that's like our most important variable. That's what the JD Power score represents. Right underneath that, we have what I'm calling index score error. And that basically gives you an idea as to how unusual the actual score of customer satisfaction is. And so basically, we have models of customer satisfaction. They're statistical models. You can use them to make predictions. So you get a predicted score of customer satisfaction, and then respondents, they actually provided an actual one when they took the survey. You compare those two values, take the absolute difference, there you go. You have your metric of error. Right underneath that, we have an interesting little subset of respondents. They're called percent fast and random index. So our index model, it lives on its own survey page. And we measure how much time respondents are taking to complete that page. It turns out that there's a subset of respondents who complete it really fast, but also at random. And so it begs the question, how can you process that fast? And the answer is, like, you probably aren't. You're just doing it really fast, you want to get through it. So it's an important metric to keep track of because it adds some context as to the scores you're seeing. For the next kind of category of metrics, these engagement metrics, I think probably everybody in the room is familiar with what these mean. The only wrinkle here is that we applied the speeding and slow poking at a survey page level. And so basically, we would measure if a respondent complete a particular survey page really fast or really slow, and we just kind of sum it up throughout the survey. Ending with the last category of metrics, these are kind of interesting. They relate back to our router. So as Jay mentioned, we profile respondents to determine survey eligibility. And so we asked them if they use a variety of products. And so this particular respondent, they're saying they have a credit card, they pay electric, water, wireless, but they don't have TV, solar, and coal. I'm not sure if you see. Well, anyways, doesn't matter. They don't have coal. So this, to me, I have no issues with this type of response pattern. An atypical respondent, on the other hand, would give you something like this. So, it's odd in 2 ways. First of all, they're indicating that they don't pay for high incidence products. So they don't pay electric, they don't pay water, and then they don't pay wireless. So already kind of interesting, suspicious. What makes it arguably even more suspicious is the fact that they're completely off the grid. So actually, it's a bit off, misaligned, but what basically this should show is that for solar, they're saying, yeah, I have solar, but I don't have electric. So what, you're completely off the grid? I mean, it's possible, but unlikely. The reason I bring up this metric is because I'll be showing it for the solar study. So let's start with some numbers. Let's get into it. This is the first set of results for e-commerce. This is our high incidence study. And the valid respondents, they represent, the clean set of data. They didn't fail any quality checks. And, for instance, our best guess for overall customer satisfaction for the study would be a 683. Now, when we look at respondents who failed the legacy checks, it's already off, right? Basically, kind of the story that's going to get built up here is that the data are off, and they're off in a bad way. And to give you an idea to kind of interpret, these numbers, the 683 versus 667, that's pushing a 20-point drop. And just to give some context, if I give data to practice, and it's off by already 5 to 10 points year over year, they want me to dive into it. They want they want some extra detail. They're not just going to prove that, right? If I were to give them something that's pushing 20 points difference year over year, it's a couple of meetings. So just all to say, that's a large difference. And you can kind of apply that bit of benchmarking for the error. So on average, you might expect 90, but it shoots up to 131. That's huge. That's something to take note of. And you're starting to see a subset of data that's just categorically different. If we look at that percent of respondents who go through the survey page really fast and at random, it goes up a bit, and you're thinking, okay, not too much to take note of. Well, that's when I go into the retest checks. So the story here becomes perhaps even more clear. Your index score is down to 628. It's a totally different subset of respondents. Your error, again, is higher. And then that percentage of fast randomizers shoots up to 10%. That's 1 in 10 respondents who are going through the most important page in our survey and just doing it at random and really fast. And if I build out this slide here to all the other numbers, it basically shakes down to be the case that relative to the valid respondents, basically every metric we're seeing is off, and it's off in a bad way. And if we go to the solar study, it's more of the same. Again, I just start kind of with the small little screenshot here. Already with the legacy respondents, they're off, and they're off in a bad way. And if I look at respondents who fail the retest checks, again, like these differences, they're quite large. 614 to 640, that's almost 30 points. The fast and random index respondents, they're up at 10%. And if I build out this slide here, you kind of start to see the picture that the quality of data that we are identifying with the legacy checks, it seems like that signature of flavor of low quality data is also being identified by the retest checks. Okay, cool, so that's like our first point. The next thing you're probably all wondering, and I've been showing it in the slides, but I haven't spoken to it explicitly, are the percentage of low quality data that's being identified. And let's just show it in a plot here. And there's basically 2 points. So with the dark blue, those are the percentage of data that were identified by retest checks, and the light blue is legacy checks. Right off the bat, you can see the retest checks, they're identifying higher percentage of low quality data. What makes it interesting is that with a low incidence study like solar panels, that shoots up to 12%. That's twice as much as a legacy check at 6%. So that's kind of, the retest checks are kind of proving their worth in situations that, arguably matter even more. And then the next question becomes, well, is there any overlap, right? If a respondent fails the retest check, do they fail the legacy check? Are they likely to fail it? Yeah, no. 8 to 10% overlap, very small. This is very important because if you're in a situation where you really care about data quality, you're best off implementing both types of quality checks. And this is basically the point in the slide, or point of presentation where I thought, okay, I'm done. But then I started looking at panels, and can these quality checks determine which panels are giving you, high quality, low quality data? Yeah, it turns out they can. You can take away many things. Obviously, the panels, I won't reveal who they are. Jay won't, so don't bother asking us.
Top secret.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things here. For me, the most interesting kind of result is that with a low incidence study like solar panels, you have to kind of use the retest checks to determine what panel is giving you good versus low quality data. You tend to see more spikes with the retest checks, whereas the legacy ones, it's relatively flat. As an example, with panel 4, it looks like they're kind of like on par for the course, right, with solar panels. But then when you see their retest performance, it's like, whoa, wait up. They're not giving us good stuff. And so I show this all to say that, yeah, panels, you might start getting evaluated based on these retest checks, at least at JD Power, could happen. And so that basically concludes our presentation. These are the 4 points we went through. And yeah, basically retest checks seem to be identifying a large subset of low quality data that I think all of us suspected existed. And we're just trying to find, trying to determine how to identify it. And yeah, that's the presentation. And thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you, everyone.